Okay, hello. Welcome to the August user group for XMod Pro. I'm Kelly Ford, and I'm joined today by Melinda, also of DNNDev.com, and Patrick Ryan from Reflect Media Group. We got a really good session lined up for you today, and we know that August, typically, depending on, I guess, where you are, I'm probably not in Australia, but here in Arizona, August is a pretty horrible month to be alive. We have humidity and temperatures ranging in the 110 to 115 degree range. So we thought we'd stay inside and work on some interesting projects in XMod Pro. And I'm going to show you basically how to do nearly anything you want using custom actions. This is a more advanced topic, and it involves some custom programming. So if you know ASP.NET programming, either VB.NET or C#, you should be able to follow along just fine. It's actually very simple, and so even if you've never done it before, this is a good way to approach kind of dip your toe in the water, so to speak, of development, and greatly enhance your XMod Pro flexibility. So we'll be covering that as well. And Patrick, I think, is going to be discussing how to deal with feeds and call them with AJAX. And you want to introduce yourself, Patrick, or did you go offline?
I muted myself to be polite. But
oh, okay.
Patrick here with Reflect Media Group. Glad to be here. Thank you, Kelly.
You have your camera on?
No, I don't.
Okay. Well, get it on, man.
I'm on now. See, I was trying to get out of your way. Hi, everyone.
There he is.
Thank you for the introduction, Kelly. Glad to be here.
All the way from Paducah, Kentucky.
You don't have to share that to the public.
And your address and phone number is?
Yeah.
His social security number starts with. So Patrick will be on in just a little bit. The first order of business, though, is to tell you about the Q&A feature that we have enabled for this session. And so if you haven't looked yet, over on the left, if you hover your mouse over towards the left-hand side of your window in the Hangouts, there'll be a toolbar that pops up, and one of those says Q&A. If you'll click on that, it'll start the Q&A application. And then over in the right-hand side, you can ask your questions, and we'll be able to see those and answer them. So whenever you have questions, go ahead and type them in, and you'll be able to see when we answer them. It's actually kind of a neat thing. So later on, with the recorded version of this, these, at least according to the directions, the instructions, these parts where we actually answer your question, those will be bookmarked in the video, so you can get to them a lot quicker on the video. So it's kind of a neat idea, and we're going to give it a shot this month and see how it goes. Okay, so if anybody is around and would like to ask any questions, we are going to keep it kind of open. We have this one session, and then Patrick's going to talk about talk about calling feeds. But we want this to be a user group, more of an informal setting if we can. So feel free to ask any questions you have, and we will answer them to the best of our ability. We may not be able to get you the best answer without a little extra work, but we'll do the best we can. So go ahead and fire away any questions whenever they come to your mind. Okay, I'm going to try something a little bit different this month, and to do a little keynote presentation along with my my coding, and so I'll have to work on getting to be able to switch screens quickly. So if you'll bear with me when I do that, let's go ahead and try to share my screen, and that will be this one. Share that. All right. Hopefully you can see that okay.
Looks good.
All right, good, thanks. So what we're going to talk about is an advanced topic, but even though it's advanced, it doesn't mean it has to be hard. It's just something you wouldn't do every day. But XMod Pro, as flexible as it is, it can't account for every specific situation you might be in. If your client might ask you for certain things that XMod Pro isn't specifically capable of doing, you might need to turn to custom action. There are other ways to handle specific client needs with JavaScript, CSS, your own custom HTML layouts, with AJAX calls to feeds, and with custom template tags as well. So there are a lot of extensibility points, including custom form controls and what we're going to talk about today, which are custom actions. Or, as I would like to say, how to solve nearly any problem without really trying. That's a bit of an overstatement. You're going to actually have to type out a little bit of code, but you'll find that it's surprisingly little code that you have to deal with. So let's get started. First of all, what are actions? Actions are non-visual form commands, and they are run after a successful submission on the form. And what this means is that, let's just say you have a contact form, and you want to save that data into the database as a new contact. Well, then the user presses the submit button. The submit command gets called, which saves that data to the database. And then typically you might send an email to that person or to your sales department to confirm that contact. The actions are actually run after a successful submission to the database, so the data is stored in the database, but before emails are sent and before the user might be redirected to a different page. This becomes very important because actions are chainable, and what that means is that they execute in one after another in the order that they're defined in the form. And ordinarily that's not a big deal, but what XMod Pro does is it gives you, first of all, it gives your action all of the data that's been submitted in the database. It also gives you all the environmental data that exists at the time, things like what the module ID is, what the user's ID and username, etc. are, things like that, the portal ID. So you can use all that information in addition to all the information that's been submitted by the form, and then you can do whatever you want with that data. So let's just say that you add a record to the database based on that data, a separate record, and you can then do a query on the database, let's say, and pull back another value, a separate value, and then you can stick that into the chain. Once you've done that, then any action that is performed after that, after your action, will have access to that data that you've put into the chain. So that's what we mean by chainable, and all of that will happen in order and before any email is sent or any redirection happens. So that means that you can actually generate, let's say, a custom email message for each individual user based on whatever data you might have in the database, and you can just send that down the chain to the email. It's really very, very handy, very powerful. I think once you get used to it, you'll find you might be using custom actions a lot. Okay, what are they good for? Well, as I said, they're good for really anything. The reason that I say that is that you're really executing server-side code, and just like XMod Pro is server-side code, just like .NET Nuke is server-side code, you have access to any code that runs on the server, or anything that code has access to. So you can really do anything. Like I said, you could run custom SQL commands, or SQL commands as I like to say, and run anything you want on server-side code. That would mean things like, let's just say you could add a user to MailChimp using their API as an example, or you could send an SMS message. There are a lot of services out there like Twilio and Clickatel which allow you to do that. So you could use their API on the server to send SMS messages. You could clean up files in a folder and resize an image that's been uploaded, and you can send your own email notifications without even bothering with XMod Pro's notifications. So there really is, what you can do is virtually unlimited, and that's why actions can be very powerful. Even though they're powerful, creating actions is not hard. It does require that you know some programming, but it's not complicated, it's not convoluted. You don't have to spend days and years and months trying to figure out a new language. It uses the existing language that you may already know as a developer, either C# or VB.NET, and we'll be talking about VB.NET, or using VB.NET in our examples here. But the amount of code you have to write is really surprisingly very small. So with that said, here are the requirements for creating an action. First of all, you're going to need Visual Studio Pro. I'm not sure, because I've never really used Express. At one point, you couldn't use Express for something like this, but I think you might be able to with the most recent versions of Visual Studio Express. What you really need to be able to do is to create a DLL file that you can put into the bin directory of your .NET Nuke website. So if you can do that with Express now, then you could use it. Other than that, you just need XMod Pro 4 or later. That is when actions were introduced. And if you want to take advantage of some of the things we're going to show today, you're going to need XMod Pro 4.5 because that version introduced custom properties. And we'll be showing you how to use those in the session today. Okay, briefly, let's run over what the basic setup is for getting started. First, you're going to, in Visual Studio, you're going to create a new empty web project. You are going to then verify and change your assembly and namespace if you needed. You'll also want to change the output of your project so that it outputs the DLL to your test website, test DNN website. And then you're going to add these three references to your project, the .NET Nuke DLL, and then two XMod Pro DLLs, the common.dll and the web.controls.dll. So that's really it. That's all for the requirements, and that's all for the keynote presentation. I am now going to switch over to the Windows side of things, and this might get a little tricky. I'm running on a Mac and need to run Windows out of Parallels, so give me a second here. Okay, making some progress. Just cleaning up a few things. Be with you in just a second. All right. Now to change my screen share. All right. Hello. Now we'll go back to this, and we'll share that screen. That might be a little small for you, so let me change some things around here. See how this goes. All right, hopefully that is big enough for everybody. If you're having problems, put it in the Q&A or in the group chat, and Linda will signal me if I need to change something. First of all, let me log in here. We have a test website set up. It's DNN 732, so that's the most recent version of .NET Nuke that we have available. And we're going to be working off of that. You'll notice that I actually set up a little alias called DNN732.com, but it's still running off my local host site. Okay, let's go over to Visual Studio, and this is the project that I have set up. And what I'm going to do is kind of run you through this, and this code will be available to you after the session if you want it. First of all, you might want to take some notes, and we're going to go to the project first. So what we did, we just created an empty web project, as I mentioned, and then we went to our project properties. So you could just right-click on the project in Solution Explorer and check properties, and that will take you here. So go to the application tab of your properties, and the first thing you want to do is check on your assembly name and your root namespace. These really should be the same, and what I like to do, because it makes it a little bit easier for your end users, is I'll put not only will I put the company name, no better, then XMod Pro and action. So basically I have no better dot XMod Pro actions dot, and then whatever action I'm creating or whatever action library that I'm creating. And then I'll duplicate that over in the root namespace. This will become useful later when we actually register the action in our form. It'll make it a lot easier. The next thing you want to look at is your target framework. If you're running the latest version of Visual Studio or Visual Studio Express, it'll probably default to 4.5. What you do is really up to you. It depends on what version of .NET Nuke you're going to be installing into. Typically these days you're in good shape if you do 4 or 4.5, especially if you're going to do DNN7 or above. You can choose 4.5, I think. 4 is a minimum, and 4.5 I think is recommended for DNN7. You can correct me if I'm wrong. Other than that, we are going to, once we've set that, we're going to go to the Compile tab. And what I've done is I have set the output path of my project to my test site. You can see it's under the test sites folder and DNN732 and then the bin folder. So if we take a browse of that, so here's where I keep all my test sites that I'm working on. The one I've set up is DNN732, and then in the bin directory here is where I am feeding it. So I just select the folder and it sets that up. Okay. Next, that's pretty much all we have to worry about with the, oh, I'm sorry, the next step is to add your references. It's something you don't want to forget. And for that, you want to make sure you're dealing with the most recent version of .NET Nuke that you're targeting. It doesn't necessarily have to be DNN732. It could be a DN6, for instance. Whatever the baseline version of .NET Nuke that you're dealing with, that's what you want to reference here. And right now, an easy thing for you to do, especially if you're just testing things out, is to add a reference to the actual site. So you can see that I've done that here. The path to the .NET Nuke DLL you'll see is under my test sites folder in DNN732 in the bin directory, and it's .NET Nuke.dll. I've done the same thing for the XMod Pro libraries that I need. I had already pre-installed XMod Pro onto that test site, so all I had to do was click Add, and then I browsed under this tab. I browsed for them. Click the Browse button. Click the Browse button. There we go. And I have navigated to test sites DNN732 in the bin directory, and then I can just find the file that I want, like xmodpro.common, and then the other one is xmodpro.webcontrols, and I just add them. And then it shows up here in your list. If you've done development before, built modules before, this is all not new to you at all. But for those of you who haven't, this is kind of a good primer for you on how to do this. The other thing that you want to do, so you don't have any problems, is that you want to see this copy local column. All of these are false. When you actually add a reference to a DLL in the way that we just did, it's going to by default set your copy local to true. So what you want to do is double-click on the file, and the properties panel for that particular file will show up. And there is the copy local property. You want to set that to false from true. The reason you do that is because if copy local is true, then it's actually going, because we've set up the path to where our project is being built, and that path is the site where we're referencing these DLLs, we don't want to try to overwrite those DLLs. We just want to say, we want a reference to these files. We don't want you to try to copy them over to the test site. We'll take care of all that. So that's what that's for. And in the way that we've set things up here, you want to make sure the copy local is false. Okay, I hope everybody is following me and you understand okay. I will keep on moving then. And next up, we will actually look at the one file we have to deal with in order to create our reference or our action. And that is, well, in this case, we're going to create an ability to execute custom SQL command. And actually, it's going to be a predefined SQL command, but we're going to be able to pass our own values into it from the form. It's kind of a contrived example, but it's a good example nonetheless, something you can play with and expand on later on. So what you'll see first at the top of the file is we've imported 3 different namespaces. We've imported nobetter.xmodpro, nobetter.xmodpro.web.controls.form.action. We're going to be building an action, so it makes sense. And then because we're dealing with a database, we've also implemented or imported the system.data.sql client namespace. All of this really just makes it easier for us to type things out. We don't have to, for instance, we don't have to prefix every object that we're dealing with. We don't have to type all that out again and again and again. So it's just nice to have those imports up there. If you're doing C#, you have to have the usings up there, but we don't have to worry about that in VB.NET. Okay, the next thing I want to point you to is the class. We've defined the class. We just called it custom command. Now this, whatever you call the class, is important because that will define how you define or specify your action in the XMod Pro form, which we'll get to in a second. So just remember, we've called this custom command, the name of our class. The class now, one of the requirements is that you have to inherit from custom action. Custom action is actually that. So you can see how we saved a lot of typing by adding an import statement. So if you didn't add the import statement, then you'd type it all out. nobetter.xmodpro.web.controls.form.action.custom-action. Okay. So let me go ahead and delete that again. We'll just do custom action. Next, we've set up a couple of properties, and this is going to be more clear once we get to the actual implementation. These are pretty simple. We're going to be dealing with inserting a contact record after a form has been submitted, and part of the properties of a contact is first name and last name, and we have a database table already set up to receive this contact information. So we're just setting a couple of properties on our class called first name and last name, and we're initializing them to an empty string. We could also, if you're not familiar, we could also do that as an empty string, but this is actually a constant that Visual Basic provides us. We'll use string.empty. The next method is the one thing that is required by XMod Pro actions. So when you inherit from custom action, you are required to override the method called execute. And the reason for that is the entry point. That is what XMod Pro is going to call whenever it executes your action. And it's going to pass you in some really cool information. This first thing is the PMB is actually a portal module base. This is something, if you program .NET, you're familiar with it. It's what all modules inherit from, or most all modules inherit from. And it contains a lot of very useful information, like the portal ID, the current user information, all of that. So XMod Pro, we're not going to use it in this situation, but XMod Pro will pass you in that portal module base object for the current module, and you can get whatever information you need off of it. Also important is that XMod Pro is passing you in an object called XI, and it is an XItem property, or XItem object. You'll notice that it is passing it in by reference. That means you can change this object, and this feeds into the chainability we talked about earlier. That means if you change or add a property to this XI object, that change will be reflected in every other subsequent action that executes. So this could be very powerful for sending things, chaining actions together, and sending information down the line to other actions. Again, we won't use that aspect of it in this intro tutorial, but we will use the XItem in order to populate our properties up here. So what I like to do is I like to encapsulate functionality into specific functions or subroutines or methods, and I've done that here. The first thing we're going to do is ensure our child controls are in existence, that ASP.NET has set up child controls, and what that means specifically is that ASP.NET has created the property tags of our tag. So just put it in there. It's going to be required for you if you want to use custom properties. The next thing is read properties. This is just a subroutine that I created that makes it easier to take those child property tags and read them in to these properties here. So the read properties function, is right here, and it loops through each of the properties of our class. And each property is called an action property. So that basically means that you'll be able to get a name for the property and a value for the property. So it's good practice just to loop through each property as an action property in the properties collection. Then I just use a select case or a switch if you're using C# to get the property name. I make sure that I put transform it to lowercase so I can do an adequate or an accurate comparison. So if the property name is first name, then I set my property to the property's value. If it's last name, then I set my last name property to the property's value. Hopefully that makes sense. Pretty straightforward. And that's all I'm doing. The next thing, in order to be able to retrieve data from the form, I'm going to have to replace field tokens. And I do that in this function here that I've created called replace tokens. And you'll notice that it takes an XI object so that so it can deal with data from the form. That actually contains all the data from the form. So all I'm doing is I'm saying if the first name property has actually been set, if it's not null and it's not empty, then I'm going to go ahead and replace tokens in that first name property. And the XI object conveniently has a replace tokens method. So all I have to do is call replace tokens and pass in the first name property. I do the same thing for the last name, and the XI object will automatically take care of replacing all those tokens for us. And then we will have the data from the form. The final thing is something specific to our particular action, and that is execute command. And this is very simple. If you've ever done any database activity, this will be very familiar to you. We're just setting up a plain SQL command where we're inserting into the context table the first name, the last name, and whether or not the user is active. And then we're passing in these parameters at fname, at lname, and at isActive. For that, we use the using keyword, which everybody who does database work will know that this using the using keyword allows you to clean up after yourself, especially if there have been mistakes. You don't have to worry too much about closing connections and disposing of objects. Excuse me. So we create a new SQL connection, and we're passing in the connection string to the .NET Nuke database. .NET Nuke provides this function for us to get that string. So all we have to do is pass that in to the new SQL connection command. Then we establish another using command to create our SQL command. This is what's actually going to perform this insert for us. So we create a new SQL command, and we pass in the command text that we defined above, and we also pass in the connection that we just created in the line just before it. Finally, we add our parameters. Those are these, and we add those using the add with method, which helps protect us against SQL injection attacks. So we do command.parameters, add with value, and the name of our parameter and the value of our parameter. Same for the last name or lname is the parameter name, last name is the value we want to pass in. And then for the isActive, we're just passing in 1 because isActive is a Boolean field, it's a bit field. It's either 1 or 0. If it's 1, it's on or true. If it's 0, it's off or false. Finally, we set the type of command we want to execute. In this case, it's all text. We're not calling the stored procedure, so we're telling the command that it should be a text command type. Finally, we open the connection and execute our query. And that's it. This is a horrendously complicated bit of code, huh? Not a lot to it, and yet it is very powerful. Let me show you just how powerful, because once we've done this, we will compile it. Well, I've already compiled it, actually, but we can, from our project menu, the build menu, just build our solution, and what that's going to do behind the scenes is it's going to move our compiled DLL over into our test website, which I have here. This is our DNN732 website. Let me make sure I'm still logged in. And we are waiting and waiting and waiting. As ASP.NET restarts, this would be a great time to answer some questions, but we don't have any, because apparently I am just so clear in my discussion that no one has any problems at all, right? Yeah. Normally I get a big groan out of the audience at that stage. Okay, so we're good. We're still logged into our website, and this is the form that I've already pre-created. I'm going to open it up and show you what it's all about. All we've done to enable our action is add this tag. Very simple tag. As you remember, we set up our namespace and our assembly name in the project, if you recall. And the assembly name was nobetter.xmodproactions.SQLaction. And the namespace was nobetter.xmodproactions.SQLaction. Well, to save you some typing, XMod Pro, whenever you create an action tag, it will take this bit here and it will prepend it to that, like so. So you don't have to type any of that extra stuff. You just type in the name of your class, which is custom command. I'm going to get a drink. Hang on. Okay, so let me switch back over to the project so you can reference this. Again, our class name is custom command, and our assembly name, no better to xmodproactions.SQLaction, and our namespace is the same thing. But when we define it in the project, or in the form, I'm sorry, we do not specify this stuff because XMod Pro does it for you. Less typing. It'll save you from having carpal tunnel syndrome. Just use the class name as your namespace in the action tag. Now the properties we want to set on our custom action are the first name and last name, if you recall. Let me go back. Our properties are here. And so this is where we're setting them in the form with those child property tags right here. First name and last name. And you'll notice, like just about everything else in XMod Pro, whenever you want to use a value from a field, you use the field tokens. And use single quotes around them. So what will happen is when XMod Pro processes this action, it's going to put these properties into that properties collection that we saw right here. So you're going to have a property name of first name and a property name of last name. Those will be the two properties you have in your collection, and those are specified here for name. Name equals first name and name equals last name. The values are field tokens, and that means that we're getting those values from the form. And as you do with anything else in XMod Pro forms, when you want to use that value, you're referring to the data field property of that particular control. So this control's value will go into this property, and this control's value will go into the last name property right there. And that's all there is to it. I've set up a dummy submit command. It doesn't do anything. It just allows us to submit the form, and doesn't actually perform any actions at all. So let's go ahead and give this a shot and see what happens. So we've got our form here. We're prompting for first name and last name. We'll do Patrick and last name of Ryan. And I will click, well, first of all, just to prove it to you, and call up the database. This is actually the database table right now. A live view into the data. So you can see it's got a contact ID column and a first name column and a last name column, and if I can get my cursor to work. And an is active column. So we're going to be passing in the first name and the last name, and we're going to automatically be setting is active to true when we submit this form. So let's submit Patrick's name. All right, everything seems to have worked. No errors. So we'll go back to our table, and we're going to refresh our table. And you can see Patrick and Ryan and True are now in our contact table. If we go back to our form and change that to George Washington, click Add, we have George Washington in our table as well. And that's it. Now, like I said, custom actions are very powerful. This is just a kind of a contrived example to show you the basics, the mechanics of how you would go about creating an action. If you have questions, feel free to ping me on our site or ask questions in the Q&A section here of the video, and we'll get back to you. But we will also be covering other aspects of creating actions, of extending XMod Pro through custom template tags, custom form controls, etc., as we move through in future user group meetings. So also come back and stay tuned for those. Those should be very, very useful for you. Again, any questions? I am not seeing any. So I imagine we'll get some questions when people are watching the video. So go ahead and post on the page, comments on the videos, post comments on the event page here, or post on our website, and you can reference the August user group video when you do that, and we'll do our best to answer your questions. And that takes care of that. Up next is Sir Patrick Ryan, who hopefully is ready with his presentation.
I am. Hi, Kelly.
Hey, Patrick. Hope I gave you enough time to finish your presentation.
Yeah, perfectly fine. Let me find my screen button.
Oh, hang on. We do have a question. I didn't see it.
Is there a way to debug the DLL?
Oh, there it is. Wow. Took a long time to come up.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there a way to debug the DLL? Yes. You'll notice if we go to our project, and we'll go to this is the project properties.
Can you share your screen?
Oh, I probably should. Thank you. And that will be here. So this is the project properties for our project, and you'll notice here on the compile page we have a configuration set up. This is the debug configuration. When you're ready to actually put it into production or to sell it or to offer it to your client, you'll want to compile it in a release version. But we're doing it in the debug version, and what that means, for those of you who haven't done any development, it will not only create a DLL file, but it will also create what's called a PDB file, which has a lot of your the debug information for your project. It has things like line numbers and things like that. So when we compile our project in debug, not only with the DLL, but also the PDB file will be sent over to our test site, and I'll show you that now. So here's the root of our site. We'll go to the bin folder, and we'll go down and see that, what do they call it again? Oh, no better .xmod pro actions SQL action. Okay, so here we go. It actually sends several other things over to it as well as part of the project, but the only things we're interested in are the DLL and the PDB file. And that PDB file helps you to debug things. So now, if we want to debug this, first of all, let's get back to our page. And you'll realize that you remember that the action is executed after the form is successfully submitted, but before things like the email and the redirect happen. So we'll have to submit this form in order to execute or trigger the loading of our project. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to our project, and over on the SQL action page, the first thing that XMod Pro is going to call in this project is the execute method. There might be some other things that actually get triggered before XMod Pro calls the execute method, but this is typically where you'll want to go. I'm just going to place a breakpoint by clicking over in the left gray column, and now I've set a breakpoint for us. That means that when the project loads, it's going to stop on that point, on that line number 13. The next thing I need to do is set this up so that it can be stepped into, and we do that by hitting Control-Alt-P on Windows. Control-Alt-P. This will bring up the process viewer, where you can attach to a process. That's Control-Alt-P. And then what you want to do is, in this window, you want to just type W, in most cases, to get to the w3wp.exe process. And if you're running multiple local versions, you might have multiple w3wp processes running, so you might have to experiment to see which one it actually works with. I'm only running one site, so this is all we need. I can just click on that and then click Attach, and then it will prompt us saying, hey, this is probably dangerous, but we know it's not because it's just on a local machine, so we'll click Attach again. And you look here, if the dot was white, and now it's red. If for some reason it can't load the PDB file, if maybe it's pointing to the wrong direction, maybe the PDB and the DLL files, you actually accidentally copy them to a different folder other than the website you think you're debugging, then you'll notice something, that white dot will probably be there. So you have to, in order to actually get it to step into your code and stop on that line, that dot has to be red. So it's red, we're good. We go back to our website. We'll type in something like Andrew, I don't know, Clark. I don't know if that's someone. I'm sure it's someone. Oh, Andy Clark, yeah. So we'll click Add, and you can see it pops us over into Visual Studio, and we've stopped on line 13, Ensure Child Controls. So from this point forward, you can do debugging. Ensure Child Controls, you don't really need to step into. You can step over that, but we'd go to Read Properties, which is one of the functions that we created. And now we're into the, let me get rid of these so you can see better. Now you can see we're in the Read Properties method, and we're going to step through each of the properties sections. Up here in the toolbar, you'll see where my cursor is, just under the menu. I am pressing the button that says Step Over. You can also step into functions. Most of the time you'll step over, because a lot of times you might go into functions you don't want to, you don't care about, so you just use Step Over. So we're stepping through the properties. The first property that it's running through in the properties collection is, we can inspect that now by just hovering over property. You can see the property name is first name, and we could actually look at other values. If we look at autos here, we can expand the property here, and we can see all the other values that are part of this object. A lot of these are basic ASP.NET properties that have been added. They're added to any control, so you won't have to worry about those. But things like name and value, which are the two properties you can see. So name here is first name, and the value of that is down at the value. And you can see that at this stage, the value is actually the field token. This is probably a good thing. I'm glad you asked the question, Stefan, or Stephen. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Sorry if I mutilate your name. So it's very important. Right now, the field token text is right there. So all we're doing is we're transferring the field token text to our internal properties at this stage. So that's what we're doing here. First name is the field token for first name, and the next property is going to be last name, and we're transferring the field token, which you can see here is the last name field token. So that's getting set to our property. That's why we need to call this next function, replace tokens, with the XI object, because the XI object actually has the values from the form, so we can do the replacement using the xi.replace tokens. So first name right now is a field token. If I step over this, let it execute, when I go back to first name, you can see that first name is now Andrew. And the same thing is going to happen for last name, which is now a field token. Let it execute, and last name is now Clark. And we can just let it run again. To finish out, we can just hit continue and let it finish its business, and it's done here. We can go back and check in the database and see that Andrew Clark is now in the database. So I hope that answers your question. Are there any other questions? Any I missed? I'm not seeing any. So I think that's it. Again, ask questions later on if you need to, and we'll be around and try to help you out. And that's that. We'll move on to Patrick now. Patrick, you're up for real this time.
All right. Thank you, Kelly. That was awesome. This is Patrick, Reflect Media Group, and part of the DNNDev team. And
your video on? There we go.
Let me turn my video on. And what do we have, about 15 minutes, Kelly?
Yeah.
Okay, I am put together something fairly simple. And let me know when my screen is visible. You should see 2 Google Chrome windows. Am I up? Awesome. Okay, so what I want to try to do here is very quickly and briefly demystify feeds, and also demystify a scary term, if you've never heard it before, AJAX, which the long, boring definition is asynchronous JavaScript and XML. The technical definition, which you will care little about at first, is AJAX is a group of interrelated web development techniques used by the client side to create asynchronous blah, 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 blah. So basically, to sum it up, what is AJAX? AJAX is really cool. It allows us to grab content from a query behind the scenes, take that content, and insert it into our page without a page refresh. If you've looked at some of the XMod Pro docs, you'll see stuff like the load feed and different AJAX tools and stuff like that. What we're actually going to do, and I'll show you this, is we're going to use AJAX directly to trigger our feed, grab the content from our feed, and insert it into our page. So what you're seeing here is on the left is a form. I've created 2 simple tables. One table holds authors, is just author ID and author name. And the other table holds the author's books, which is book ID, author ID, and the name of the book. So if you watch, when I refresh this page, we've got a template that displays the authors. We have 2 authors, John Doe and Jane Doe. And these list items you see here are the books. And I'm going to go ahead and add another book to John Doe. And what I want you to watch is on the right-hand side, you're going to see that book dynamically show up within anywhere from 3 to 10 seconds, depending on when this happens. So we're going to call this book Kelly's Photography. I love that. We'll add that.
Very expensive book.
Very, very expensive book. Now keep an eye over on the right-hand side. I've got the interval set to every 10 seconds, so depending on when that cycle grabs it, there it goes. Did you guys see that? So Kelly's Photography automatically showed up, kind of snuck in there. The page didn't refresh, and pretty much you can use this technique to expand your tool set in a vast array of ways. So let's break this thing down and demystify what this actually does, if DNN will behave. Okay, so here we've got the single template instance here called Demo Author. Let's open this up and take a look. Very simple. You look at the list data source, we've got select author ID and author name from Demo Author. Here's our header template, where we've got just a heading tag for authors, and here's our item template. I've got the item template wrapped in a class called author block. I've got a span within there with a class of a-id, and I've got it set to display none. And the only purpose of this span tag is for us to hide the unique identifier of the author inside of our item template so we can access it later. Then we have the author name. And then if you look here on line 15, we have a div element with the class of author books, but there's nothing inside. And that's actually these list items that you see right here that end up inside of that div. Below that, we've got a jQueryReady tag. I'll explain it in a moment. And below that, I've just got a regular script tag to insert JavaScript, and I've created a function that's going to call our feed. So let me stop for just a second and explain what a feed is. A feed is everything that a template is, but it's outside of the skin and outside of the box, and you can access it outside of your typical DNN page that you're currently on. So if I go into my control panel, go to feeds, here is the feed that handles grabbing the books, and you can see we've got a list data source that says select book ID, author ID, book name from demo author book, where author ID equals, and I've got a parameter here called AID, which quite obvious stands for author ID. Well, that's a parameter, so how do we assign the value of that parameter? And that would be in the parameter tag. So we've got the parameter name, AID, and the value is single quote, double open bracket, form, colon, AID, and then closing that. And the data type is an integer. Now, this this signifies a form post. There's two different main ways. You've got a get and a post. A get retrieves data, a post posts data. But either way, we can still return data back from this feed. So basically, we're going to send a form post to this feed, and we're going to send it the AID, the author ID. And when we do that, that feed is going to run the query, and it's going to return this HTML. We've got our header template, which opens with a UL. We've got our item template, which just is a list item with the book name. And then our footer template, we're closing the UL tag. So if anyone has any questions about this feed so far, please let me know, because we're a little short on time, and I'm trying to run through this as quickly and efficiently as possible. But again, we're going to send a form post to this feed with AID, which is the author ID, and it's going to return any books by that author. All right, so let's exit here, open up our template again, and here's where the magic takes place. We've created a function called grabBooks. And with jQuery, what we're saying is we're going to, for the element of author block, for each one of those, we're going to perform something. So here's our author block. So if we have 1 author, 2 author, 500 authors, each author, we're going to perform this, and it's going to loop and continue to do so for each author that exists. First thing we need to do is assign just some shorthand here to assign this to me. This signifies this for each one. It signifies that jQuery element. So me is now this. So we're going to use me again in just a second. We also need to grab the author ID. So AID equals parseInt me find AID text. Now what this is doing is it's saying inside of me, which is this block, I want you to find the item with the class AID. And there it is. And inside of that, I want to grab the text, and that's going to be the author ID. But on top of that, we're wrapping this in a parseInt function, and what that does is it tells jQuery, it basically says this is an integer value. We don't want to guess what it is. We want to be explicit.
Hey, Patrick, can I interrupt for a second?
Yes.
Can you magnify that screen so people can read your code a little bit better?
Yeah. Let me try to do that. A little better?
Yeah, I think that's better.
Okay, great. Okay, so we've got the block of the author, which is me, and we now have, ooh, I don't know what happened there. We have the author ID, which is stored in a variable called AID. Again, it's going to go through here, and it's going to find that class AID, and it's going to grab the value that's inside it. I don't know why it keeps doing that, Kelly. All right, and now we've got our AJAX call. So we are going to send a post request. I'm having an issue here with, oh, I know what it is. It's my, it's actually, the set interval here is, let me just comment this out for a second so I can explain this.
Is it running still in the background?
That's exactly what's happening.
Oh, okay.
Thought my template was possessed for a moment. Okay. So now we got this AJAX request, and we're sending a post request to this URL. And this is the URL where feed.aspx exists. The type of request is a post. The data type that we're dealing with is HTML. And we need to send the data to that feed. We need to tell the feed what the name of the feed is. And that's XFD, in case you can't see that. And that is Demo Author Book. That's the name of our feed. Also, when you're dealing with feeds, you need to identify what portal it's associated with. In this case, I'm just using portal 0. And also, if you remember when I showed you the feed and the parameter, it was form::AID. Well, that's what this is right here. We're assigning it the value of the variable AID, which is the author ID. Once that post is successful, it's going to return us some data. So you can see we've got a success function, which inside of that data, that's an object, and inside of that object is all the HTML that's generated by that feed, which is really, really cool. So just imagine for a second, you can query a feed, you can trigger a feed behind the scenes and use all kinds of XMod Pro tools, XMod select, case, all the if-else stuff, anything you want, assign classes to different elements, and you can do advanced stuff and filter through that and do all kinds of really neat things. But for this, we're just going to go to Me, and we're going to find the author books. And we're going to replace the HTML. We're going to insert data inside of the HTML. So here is the div class author books. So we're saying Me, find that div. And inside of the HTML, we just want to drop the data. Now, we're using an XMod jQueryReady block, and basically that's shorthand for document ready function and so on. And so as soon as the page loads, we're going to do an initial grab books.
You want to explain the document ready, what the purpose of it is first?
Yeah, sure. Basically, document ready means when all the important information on the page is loaded, all the data has been sent back from the server. The browser has it in the DOM. It's available for the person to see. Basically, when the page is ready, when everything's loaded on the page, we're going to do something. So now that the page is ready, and XMod jQueryReady is a shorthand for that, makes it easier. You have to type it all out. We're going to grab those books. So here's our function, grab books. So as soon as the page is ready, we're going to call that function. So let's refresh. And there it is. And it happens so quickly that you couldn't really see that. Larger data, you could insert a little loading animator spinner or something like that. And now what we want to do is take a look at this set interval. And I just added this quick example because this is useful if you're doing stuff like live analytics or want to do some other cool features. Like let's say you've got comments on a blog that are built with XMod Pro and you want to show when new comments are available. So we've got a set interval function, and basically this is saying that every 10 seconds, so 10,000 milliseconds, I think that's right, yeah, we're going to grab the books. So we can change this to 3 seconds if we wanted to. Save and reload that. And we'll add a book for Jane Doe called Jane's Book. Jump over here. And something's broken. Kelly, it's your fault.
It is the rule of the demo.
Yeah, it really is. Not sure what I did. Huh. Yeah, I need to just reload all of this. Oh, something didn't work. Here we go. Another book.
Okay, that worked.
Yes, I'm not sure what I did there. It may have been edit view state.
You know what would be really cool is to open up the console and show the requests that are made and see the response that comes back from the server, what the feed generates for you.
Yeah, we can do that.
And you'll probably really have to magnify your window.
Well, one, I'm having some Google Chrome issues. I'm trying to. There it is. Okay, so let's go ahead and clear this. We're going to refresh the page. Let me just go ahead and clear it again. If you watch here, we've got this set for every 3 seconds. Okay. Now you can see in the network tab in the console log. I don't know if they can see this or not. I've got the. You can see what's happening every 3 seconds. You can see the method is a post. The status is 200, which means OK, and we can actually click on this and see the content type, the request. There's our form data there. There's XFD for the name of the feed, the portal ID, and the article ID, and the response headers that come back. Matter of fact, let me just show you this. So we can, let's turn this automatic view off for just a second. Now what you just saw me type there is console log. That enables me to write into this console the data. So this is the data that's returned from our feed. and inside this console, so now I can type in another book for John, and I can manually call this function and I don't know what I did wrong there. Well,
there's your test book.
All right, good, good. So this is console log's very helpful. You can use this, and a lot of people, when they're trying to debug feeds, when they're first getting into feeds, that's a serious roadblock. I can't stress enough the importance of using console to see any errors or info that's sent back from the request, using this network tab to understand what's actually happening here. And I'm running a little bit short on time, but if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. But again, that is demystifying and showing the simplicity of feeds. And once you do this a few times, go through and write these AJAX requests, it really becomes second nature, and you'll be able to do some really, really neat things with it. Check out on DNNDev.com. There's a like button tutorial and some other advanced things where you can use this technique to auto-populate text boxes and set values for drop-down lists without the page refreshing. So it's very helpful. And that's all I got.
Excellent. Thank you, Patrick. Actually, I can see that being used, very useful for, of course I can, because I have the feature, but it's very useful for making single-page applications. SPA is all the rage these days, which in web development circles, which is essentially making an application that exists on a single web page. And for that, you have to use AJAX. And XMod Pro and its feeds allows you to do that. So you can click a button in one part of the page and have it update a different part of the page. And that other part of the page doesn't even have to be an XMod Pro template. It could just be something else. You could change the color of a button somewhere. So the AJAX can be very useful. Any questions from anybody?
I'll move the screen to you.
Sorry, what?
You're screen sharing with Patrick. I didn't know if you wanted to change it to you to sign up.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess I could. Okay, Patrick, you want to end your screen share? Alrighty. So that is it for the August XMod Pro user group in all of its live glory. Of course, if you're watching it later on, you'll be able to see in its recorded form on both YouTube and on the event page on Google+. So we have this group every fourth Thursday of the month. Typically that's the last Thursday, except on some very long months. So look for the fourth Thursday of every month. We'll be having the user group online. It's free, and what's most important is that we're able to interact with you, answer your questions, do some demonstrations, and you can see what other people in the community are doing. But what we really need is your participation. So we would love to have you present, even if it's just showing off a site that you've done with XMod Pro, or a little technique that you found, or applying some HTML technique to an XMod Pro solution. Whatever it may be, let us know. Give me an email. Give me a shout out at kford, K-F-O-R-D, at DNNDev.com, and let me know that you want to present, and we will be happy to get you scheduled and put your mug up here so you can present to the rest of the XMod Pro community. We really love sharing and love it when our community members share as well. If you don't present or can't present, but you have questions, then by all means send those along too. We're always looking for suggestions on what we could present to you in these user groups, because we want them to be informative and helpful, and hopefully these have been so far, and we want to continue with that. So I will wrap it up by saying happy August, or actually good riddance to August. It's pretty miserable in Arizona. So September, I hope, will bring you wonderful fall days and cooler climates and crunchy leaves or colored leaves on the trees. And that'll do it for us from sunny and hot Scottsdale, Arizona. Have a good one.